Ooh, you didn't tell me you were a brainiac.
Welcome back, Brainiacs, to another episode of the Leather Brains podcast. Today, we are diving in to all of the great fantasy stuff. We've kind of been neglecting fantasy stuff a little bit. Been talking a lot about NFL news and all that exciting, all those headlines. But now we're going to do a full episode just on fantasy football, just on rookies, and specifically focusing on dynasty drafts, which everybody is in the middle of right now. So hopefully this is some good relevant information for you. But before we get into that, we're just going to touch on a few headlines. Nothing too serious, but Bengals fans, you got to be excited that Joe Burrow is back to throwing the football. I actually saw a headline that said it was from some medical doctor or whatever that said his injury is such that it will never fully heal. Like he's always going to be at risk for that injury. I don't know how Bengals fans feel about that. But with Joe Burrow back in the lineup, the Bengals have got to be, one of those high-powered offenses back to the way they were. You guys have any predictions on how the Bengals are going to turn out? Are they a real competitor right now with Joe Burrow and all of his injury history?
Yeah, man. I think you saw the Bengals. They were on the cusp of making the playoffs last year without Joe Burrow, and that goes to show you how much talent they have on offense and defense without Joe Burrow. You add him to the mix, and they are going to be Super Bowl contenders as long as he's healthy. But Joe Burrow staying healthy has been a challenge the past 4 years of his career, basically, whether it's ACL injuries, meniscal injuries, forearm injuries, you name it. Unfortunately, he just can't stay on the field. So prayers be to his body, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, go ahead, Kane.
I was just going to say, it's that is a little scary to hear from the coach, knowing that Joe Burrow could have that same injury every single year, hypothetically. Obviously, if he had it, one or two more times, I'm sure his career would be a little bit in jeopardy. But I actually just moved off of T. Higgins in my main league, and I moved off Burrow as well. So I'm trying to get away from that offense a little bit just because I am worried about the injury risk with Burrow. And while he does have the upside to be the number one quarterback in fantasy, it kind of just depends where your team stands and whether or not you're willing to throw that risk around for Burrow this next season.
Well, follow-up question. How long do you think the Bengals are going to be willing to take this risk? Say he plays 10 weeks and then gets another season-ending injury. Knock on wood. Hopefully it doesn't happen. But if that does happen, which we know obviously it's happened to him many times, are we starting to have a conversation? Are the Bengals starting to say, okay, well, what are we looking at? Or are they just saying Joe Burrow, when he's healthy, he is the best of the best, and we're going to do everything we can to keep him on the roster?
Yeah, no, he's staying no matter what. There's no way. Minimum 3 years he's got left on the Bengals. If all goes wrong, you also have to realize that if they get rid of Burrow, that means they're also going to lose Jamar most likely, because I don't know why Jamar would want to play there without Burrow. There's no reason. Obviously, we also can't predict injuries, so it's kind of hard to say. If he keeps getting injured, it's just obviously a little bit more scary with him. But he could be really good and throw 45 touchdowns this year, very easily. You can't necessarily predict injuries. He did have two completely separate injuries, so it's hard for me to really compare them, considering he's never had anything in his arm. But just the fact that it can affect his future play is where the concern starts for me.
So they're ride or die.
Yeah.
Yep. And he is signed through the 2029 season too, and he carries a $68.5 million cap hit in 2029. So if the Bengals were to move on, they would be in some serious cap hell. And I know there's, the cap space isn't real, but I think there's some teams this past offseason that showed us, yeah, it is real. Look at what the Chargers had to do. They had to let go of Keenan Allen and Mike Williams because they didn't have enough cap room to really sign anybody or do anything. They were just in cap hell. So I don't think the Bengals want to be in that situation of getting rid of Joe Burrow if he does have some injury concerns. They're probably stuck with him throughout that contract.
All right. Well, that may be good news for Bengals fans. They might be excited to hear that. Don't have to worry about shopping around or completely upending the franchise. Sounds like they'd have to go into a full rebuild if they decided to move on. So
let's end on a positive note with Joe Burrow. He's going to stay healthy.
Yeah,
and the Bengals will be contenders. There we go.
And they're going to lose to the Chiefs again.
Good juju back in the universe. We're good.
All right, let's talk about some bad juju. The curse of Claypool, Chase Claypool. He is been shopped around a little bit over the last couple seasons. Every team that acquires him immediately falls off a cliff. And the latest team to acquire Chase Claypool is the Miami Dolphins. They also picked up OBJ. Is this relevant news? Are these guys going to see the field ever? Is OBJ going to be a part of this offense? Is Claypool going to be a part of this offense? Or are they just kind of depth pieces that might see the field every now and again?
So I don't want to correct you, but Claypool went to the Bills.
Oh.
So we're talking about two separate teams here. Claypool is going to the Bills.
Please don't hesitate to correct me, although I wish you would have done that on the show notes and not in front of all these good people.
I just wanted to embarrass you because you're not slapped. No, I'm just kidding. But Chase Claypool is with the Bills, and we know the Bills wide receiver room is it's all over the place right now. They just drafted Keon Coleman in the second round, who we're going to touch on a little bit later. But they have Curtis Samuel. They lost Gabe Davis. They obviously lost Stephon Diggs. So Claypool is probably just going to be a training camp not rookie camp, but an off-season training camp guy for them. OBJ, I'm curious to see or hear MK's thoughts on OBJ landing with Miami.
I think OBJ is an interesting signing, but the reality is he's never going to produce anything consistent for fantasy. He might be a good guy for best ball fans out there. People who play best ball, he could be a nice late round flyer. Just, he might give you a long touchdown, one every, 4 or 5 games, give you a couple for the season. They did draft Malik Washington, which was a late pick, in round 4 or 5. I can't remember. I remember it was day 3, but obviously it doesn't affect him that much. But I don't see, he's getting 1-year deals every single year. So it's, I can't really say much for his long-term value, but it's Odell. You kind of just got to give him, give him a roster spot here and there just to make him feel better.
Entertainment value, to say the least. You're gonna have fans that are excited to have him, regardless of how much he plays. So that's good. I got a bug.
It's like, around me. Yeah, it's like how the teams in the championship every year, like you always pick up like a Tom Brady or like one of the retired players that's still on the app just because you want them to win a ring if you win. So it's kind of like one of those situations where like, yeah, one of those Giants fans comes in late season and it's like, need to get Odell that ring, even though he got one with the Rams, but needs to get Odell that ring and brings him into their roster. Late season.
So Odell's playing real life fantasy football out there and just signing with teams and hoping to get a ring with somebody.
Just getting bounced around.
It'd be I think it might be the best part of a career. Like if you were a football player, you made it to the NFL and you were, obviously OBJ had a stretch where he was spectacular, but say you were kind of just a middle tier guy, got on the field. Once you get to the end of your career, you just basically travel the country. Like you just move around, just trying to sign the next contract, hoping you sign on to a championship team. That could be fun. I respect that. Let's talk about Justin Fields as MK, our resident Bears fan here. We got some big news coming out of Steelers country. They say that Justin Fields is going to be used on kick return. Do you believe that at all?
This has to be an absolute smokescreen. It's just funny to me because people out there are still saying the Bears didn't give him a fair shot when he was traded for a 6th round pick and is now being talked about as being a kick returner for their team. So the Fields, him being great, I feel like those thoughts need to be kind of put to rest at this point. If you're still out there and you're still a big believer in Fields, I could see him being okay if they gave him a chance and putting together some decent plays, winning a few games here and there, but he will never bring you anywhere as a quarterback. And he will definitely stunt the development of their receivers as they did draft Roman Wilson, an interesting guy during the day 2 selection. So Russ looks like he's going to be on track to start, and they declined Fields' 5th-year option. So the truth is, I don't know if either of these quarterbacks are necessarily going to be Steelers after this year, which is kind of seeming like the reality with the Steelers in general is that they just can't really get that QB other than, Roethlisberger for the past 20 years.
They've been in quarterback hell since Big Ben left, and I don't think they have the answer on the roster right now. And I don't know if this team is going to be in a situation where they can draft a rookie quarterback next year, because we all know Mike Tomlin. He's not going to give you a losing record. They're going to go 9-8 every year, or 10-7 every year, just because they have Mike Tomlin, and they're not going to get a top 10 draft pick. So then they're sitting there at, pick 20 or pick 18. It's like, the fuck are we supposed to do? We lost Russ, we lost Justin Fields. Now we're going to go draft the, sixth best quarterback in the drafts. So, well, I think the situation is just going to keep on snowballing until they can sign somebody in free agency. So, free agent quarterbacks next year, watch out. You might be a Steeler.
You're looking at Dak Prescott?
Hey, yeah. If he wants out in Dallas, yeah.
All right. Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see for that. Gentlemen, I'm going to need you both to take off your fandom hats. Stop being biased. I don't want to hear anything good about the Bears. I definitely don't want to hear anything good about the Raiders. That's for sure. We are
you
going
do the
to
same, buddy.
We'll see. We'll see how that goes. I want everybody to put the bias aside, and we are going to talk strictly fantasy football. We're going to talk about these rookies. We're going to talk about where they landed, and we're going to talk about if their situation is conducive to fantasy success and if Dynasty players should really be focusing on drafting these guys high. And also, anyone who's listening, please feel free to submit your comments over to us. If you have any questions, if you have any particular draft quandaries that you'd like us to solve for you, feel free to put those down on Twitter or on YouTube, wherever you're watching. We're happy to answer those throughout the show as well. We broke these down into tiers. We've got our top tier draftees, we've got our mid tier, and then we've got our third tier. Not bad, obviously, because we're not talking about that many people, but the lowest tier we've got. And we're going to start things off with the top tier. Everybody knows Caleb Williams. Let's talk about Caleb Williams. Fandom aside, is this guy the go ahead, don't even think about it, draft him number 1 overall, especially in Superflex leagues, and just take him when you can get him if you have that number 1 pick?
Yeah, I feel like in general, mostly here, just because there were so many QBs drafted in the first round, Superflex is becoming that league also where, most people are starting to shift to it as well. So I feel like usually when I talk about things now, everything's kind of in Superflex, but I've kind of come to the decision that between Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison, that you just can't go wrong with either. I think there's good reason to take both. I think if you wanted to take the safer one, I think Marvin Harrison is a little bit safer than Caleb. I think he has less flaws to him. I think they both landed in terrific situations. The one thing I will say, and sorry to, combine him with Marv, but I feel like, that's kind of the argument that everyone's going to be going against is, who am I drafting, Caleb or Marv? They're both generational, both went, basically top pick for what a receiver could go compared to top pick for what a quarterback could go. I'm leaning towards the Marv side just because I think he is so much more of a, he's going to be like a top 5 player, whereas I would love Caleb to be, but there are more flaws to him. The Cardinals offense is going to be more run heavy than people think. I was actually researching a little bit today, and they were 7th in running last year in rush yards. A lot of rushing stats, advanced rushing stats. And, they brought in Trey Benson and drafted Paris Johnson last year. So I don't think this offense is going to be as pass heavy as it was when Kyler was a younger player. But considering the other receivers they have on their roster, Harrison should still get around 10 targets a game as a rookie, which is obviously top tier.
Yeah, do you have anything to add to that?
I agree strongly with what MK is saying. If you're between Marvin Harrison and Caleb Williams and you want the safe option, you're going with Marv. This guy is a bona fide wide receiver 1, and this is a guy that's going to be relevant for at least the next 5 to 7 years in fantasy football, because he's 21, 22 years old. We typically see wide receivers fall off a cliff at 30 years old, right? But I think this guy, he's the best wide receiver that's come out of the draft in years. And when you can get a guy like that to lock down on your team for more than 5 years, you do that in a heartbeat. But with Caleb Williams, you're looking at a quarterback, and I'm not saying this to get you all riled up, MK, but it's a case with any quarterback, right? Some of these quarterbacks could be out of the league after their rookie contract, or they could be a backup after the rookie contract. Like, what's the hit rate on first round quarterbacks? It's less than 50% of the quarterbacks are going to be good or, have a great second contract signing. So if I had a pick between the two, I'm going Marv.
All right. Well, I didn't expect KN to say that, but I agree with you. Ultimately, I think he's the safer pick, and that's the bottom line.
Yeah.
Although it's very difficult to ignore the upside of Caleb Williams with this revamped Bears offense. If you're drafted number 1 and you are not completely set at that quarterback position, it's going to be pretty hard to say no to Caleb Williams at this point in time. Let's move on to another quarterback here. And this guy, if you are drafting 3rd in your league and you need a quarterback, you're probably taking him. Let's talk about Jaden Daniels. Let's talk about this Washington offense and whether or not Jaden Daniels, let me just put it this way, and I'll pass this to you first, Yeti. Where do you think Jaden Daniels is going to end up in terms of, at the end of the season, fantasy productivity among these rookie quarterbacks? Is he dead set number 2 behind Caleb Williams? Is there some confusion there that you want to discuss?
I think there's a very real possibility that Jaden Daniels is going to be the quarterback 1 for rookies. I think he's going to finish above Caleb Williams this year. And I say that because of his rushing upside. If you watch Jaden Daniels, there's a bunch of cons on him with the size and everything. But this is a guy that ran the ball extremely well in college. And I know college is different than pro, but he's playing with Cliff Kingsbury, who's going to get him on the run quite a bit. And Jaden Daniels' first instinct is to go run the ball, basically. So he's going to give you that upside with running the ball maybe 5 to 10 times a game, maybe get you 50 rushing yards, and he might get you a rushing touchdown as well. And he does have a good arm, so I don't want to discount his arm by any means, but I think the rushing upside that he offers is greater than what Caleb Williams can offer as far as fantasy production goes.
I definitely disagree in terms of I don't know if he could be 1. I think you'd have to have a really good season just because I do predict Caleb Williams to have a great season with the weapons around him and also just the prospect that he is. But I think Daniels is the clear number 3 pick. I think you could talk about Neighbors or Odunze or, Bowers if you're in a, tight end premium league. But Daniels is the clear QB2. He's going to start from day 1, which we don't know if any of the other quarterbacks other than maybe Bo Nix will start on day 1. So I would take him at the 3rd overall pick in rookie drafts. In terms of, actual dynasty startup leagues, I don't think he's going to go that much lower than Caleb because I think people have him in that quarterback 10 to 15 range, around guys like Justin Herbert. And then, you beg the question, do I want, the older proven guy or do I want to take a risk with Daniels? And he is talented. He won the Heisman. He is 23 years old. He's been in college for a while, and his injury risk does worry me. But I think he is the safe pick here, especially, if you are trying to get a quarterback that's going to help you compete for this season. But, if you are going for that rebuild, then, Drake May or JJ McCarthy, I think, are the next, 2 up where you can consider picking them if you like them more as the younger prospects out of the group.
Well, and you got to be careful talking about injury concerns with rushing quarterbacks in Washington because all their fan base is going to get PTSD from that. So they got to protect him. But that's for sure. And I agree with you ultimately that, in fantasy, we harp on it all the time. It's the rushing upside. That makes all the difference in the world. You can talk shit on Justin Fields all you want to, but at the end of the day, fantasy quarterback, not terrible. You can rely on him for the most part. And I think Jaden Daniels is going to be in that discussion. And I could see him ending up as the QB1 in this rookie class just because of the rushing upside. He could be, have way worse on-field production when you compare him to people like Caleb Williams. But at the end of the day, for fantasy, if he's rushing for 75 yards a game and throwing a few touchdowns, it's pretty difficult to beat that. So there is a path for him for sure. And you mentioned it, MK. Let's talk about Drake May and McCarthy. This is actually a conversation that I had in one of my dynasty leagues where I was up. I needed a quarterback. I think it was at 6, if I remember right. Drake May, McCarthy are both still on the board. I took McCarthy, and everyone, for whatever reason, seemed to think that that was a ridiculous decision. But to me, it just seems like the path for McCarthy being a usable fantasy asset right away is there. Whereas Drake May, I look at this Patriots offense, I don't really know anything about it. I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know if Drake May is good. I have a lot of concerns on that front, so I'm taking JJ over Drake May every time. MK, I'll pass this to you first. Do you agree with that statement?
I like where your head's at here. I think JJ would be my pick as well. I think May does have the potential, though, to really fly up draft boards if they are able to acquire one of T. Higgins or Brandon Ayuk, Debo Samuel, a receiver on the block right now. If the Patriots are able to acquire one for Drake May, I do like May instead of McCarthy because I think he's a better prospect. Obviously, went third overall for a reason. Really young guy, a lot of arm talent. I've seen a lot of people compare him to a little bit of a Walmart Josh Allen. Obviously, that's not my comp for him, but I've just seen that. So I really like May. I think he's very talented. But like you said, like what are we going to expect here from Gerard Mayo? Whereas, we know what's going to be going on in Minnesota with Kevin O'Connell. I think that if you're not selecting JJ, it's more because you don't believe in JJ as a prospect, which a lot of people don't because he did not have the production in college that these other basically every other quarterback in the first round had.
And before Yeti jumps in here, you mentioned it a couple minutes ago, but what are the odds? Do you have concerns with either of these guys not starting? I mean, are we drafting a quarterback in the first round that may not see the field for a few weeks or even half the season, just given the situation with those coaching staffs?
Yeah, I believe both of them are going to sit, and I think that's better for them. I don't think that May should start week 1. I mean, he's going to be thrown to Jalen Polk as a week 1 rookie and Javon Baker and then KJ Osborne. There's just not that many weapons. I like to see some of the weapons develop under Brissett, who I think has a good enough arm to get them the ball enough. And I'd rather just see him sit for a year. Same with JJ. I mean, I think at this point, you can prove to Jefferson that you got the QB and that he has reason to stay. And they might not be great for this year, but you also look at the NFC North and how good it is. And I don't think it's the biggest deal in the world to sit JJ. I don't think they need to worry about really going all in to compete this year. I think they should play it slow, especially seeing with the Bears getting Caleb Williams, the Lions making it to the NFC Championship, and the Packers even making it to the divisional round last year with Jordan Love. So I think they just have to play it slow and play it however it's going to make them the most successful in the future.
That's a lot to throw at you, Yeti, but give me your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, MK. But first things first, I want to say put some respect on Pop Douglas' name, man. He still plays for the Patriots. Don't forget about Pop.
Hey, maybe he'll prove me wrong.
Yep. But I think between the two quarterbacks, I think JJ McCarthy is the most likely to sit at least a few weeks. I think Drake May can go in. He can win the job right away. And I think he's going to probably be forced into that situation. I don't know if they'll feel comfortable rolling out Brissett because this is a new offense. So they're both going to be learning it. And if Drake May is obvious, like, oh, he's a stud out there, they're probably going to roll out May. The one thing I want to say about May is I have him over JJ McCarthy in my rankings. And that's because I've seen Drake May make all the throws. I've seen his rushing upside that he offered from his college tape. And I think if you were to look back at Drake May in 2022, when he had Josh Downs at North Carolina, if he still had Josh Downs in 2023, we're probably talking about Drake May as a second quarterback taken, maybe the first quarterback taken off the board, because this is a highly productive quarterback. He is going into a situation with a lot of unknowns, obviously, a lot of unknown talents. We don't know what the offense looks like. But if he progresses the way I think he's going to, I think he could be the best quarterback in this class.
So do you, if you are drafting number 6, let's say both these guys are on the board, are you, in a situation where you're taking Drake May if you're more stable at the quarterback position and you're more confident in the quarterbacks that you already have, and JJ is more the safer option that, he has a better chance to produce immediately, or are you just taking Drake May no matter what because you value him higher?
I'm taking May if he's available at the 106. I'm drafting him. I'm going to sit on him. Obviously, with Drake May, I don't expect immediate production this year. I think you're in it for the long haul when you're talking about Drake May, because this offense is going to change as he continues to develop. And who knows, maybe next offseason, MK kind of alluded to it, Higgins is going to be a free agent. Ayuk's going to be a free agent. Because as soon as the Patriots land one of these guys or a top wide receiver next offseason, people are going to be like, oh, go buy Drake May. Go buy him. So I think right now is the cheapest that you can probably get him as far as dynasty value goes.
All right, MK, you disagreed. Do you have anything to add, or do you feel like you gave your opinion?
No, to be honest, I actually didn't disagree at all. I like what Yeti said, and I honestly can't fully pick right now. If I was in my number one league right now and I was on the clock and those were the two best prospects available, I don't know who I would take right now. I think it's kind of a toss up and it's a lot based off personal opinion. But, I think the more important thing is, when, let's say Daniels goes at 3 and then we're sitting at 4, do we see a quarterback in May or McCarthy come up, or do we see, Neighbors come up? So, I'm curious your guys' thoughts on that as well.
So we just had our rookie draft in our league of record, and Neighbors actually went at number 3. So I was sitting at number 4, and I picked Jaden Daniels. Thankfully, he fell that far, but it was just kind of interesting to see a top wide receiver like Malik Neighbors. He went to the Giants, so that's a less favorable landing spot, but he still went 3rd overall in a super flex league. Like quarterbacks, in my opinion, you have to get a quarterback in Superflex regardless. Like if not regardless, but as far as like value goes, if Jaden Daniels hits at the 104, like if he is a Lamar Jackson-esque, his value is just going to shoot through the roof. Whereas Malik Neighbors, he's playing with Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones might be gone next year. Brian Dable might be gone next year. And then he's going to start rolling into a situation where it's like Garrett Wilson. We're just waiting for the right situation to unfold. So sorry, that was a long-winded answer there, but I think I'm taking Jaden Daniels or Drake May over Neighbors.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about Neighbors. Specifically, let's talk about him versus Odunze in dynasty value here. Obviously, both of these landing spots are interesting because on one hand, you're talking about the Giants. You're talking about Daniel Jones. The Giants have a better offensive line. Daniel Jones supposedly is healthier, so maybe we'll see a little bit more production on that front, but obviously they lost a big name in Saquon Barkley. We don't know how that offense is really going to look and adjust. And then on top of that, Odunze, obviously the Bears look like they're in a really good spot, but there's a ton of mouths to feed in that offense. So what role is he going to play? Is he going to be a valuable fantasy asset in the near term, or is he more of a grab and stash and maybe plug and play on bye weeks or whatever it might be? Where do you view these guys in terms of comparing them to each other? Are you taking Neighbors for sure 100% above Odunze? And do you think there is something to be said about drafting Odunze or being excited about his situation in Chicago?
Yeah, I mentioned it before the draft. We were on here talking about the draft, and I made it very clear that I was Neighbors over Odunze, and that, I would be very happy if the Bears took him, but he's not my favorite prospect. I saw some weaknesses in his game. His situation is great. I think for dynasty value, I still believe in Neighbors more. I think one thing that's interesting is that you guys keep mentioning Daniel Jones. I think Drew Lock is going to come out of the pack here and win the job. I'm not anti Daniel Jones being a starting quarterback. I think he's fine, but it does not really make any sense for the Giants to start him because he's not going to lead them anywhere past what's the best that Jones could be this year? Wild card, maybe win a playoff game. I don't even think he gets that far with the NFC improving a lot this year. I don't think they're a playoff team. They're going to take the out because no matter how he plays, he's not going to be worth the money that they're paying him in the contract. So at that point, how does, starting Jones, I feel like they're just going to stunt the development of Neighbors. I think Drew Lock is going to be the starter here, and I think he has more potential than people think. I think he got thrown into a shitty situation in Denver. I'm not saying he's great, but he produced some decent fantasy performances last year with Seattle. And I think that Neighbors being the clear first option in this offense right now could get a very high volume of targets, and he's a big play machine. So I'm taking Neighbors. I know obviously, hopefully maybe Yeti wants to say a little bit more about Rome, but I am very high on Neighbors' talent, and I'm not that scared about the situation, even though Chicago is obviously, a very ideal situation for a wide receiver in this draft.
I love your take about Drew Lock starting over Daniel Jones. I honestly could see that happening, and I wouldn't be surprised if it did happen because I think Drew Lock gives them more upside in that offense. And I think Brian Dable's going to do whatever it takes to win, because this could honestly be his last year as a head coach if he doesn't figure it out. But staying on topic here, I prefer Neighbors, but I think it's extremely close. And I say that because O'Dunes, as of right now, he's going to be behind Keenan Allen and DJ Moore. But it's important to note that Keenan Allen, he's going to be a free agent after this year. And obviously, we know Keenan Allen, his age, we know his injury history. So Rome could see the field a lot sooner. But I think once you look past this season, Rome has the ability to become the clear wide receiver one in that offense. And he's going to be paired with Caleb Williams for the next 5 seasons at least, which is a beautiful thing when we're talking about Dynasty, because we love to get those stacks. We love the continuity with a quarterback and a wide receiver, because that connection is only going to get stronger through the years. And I think something that goes against Neighbors here is that he could be playing in a completely different offense next year. He could have a different quarterback, and he could be in the cycle that I kind of said with Garrett Wilson. Chris Olave is another guy. They're both extremely talented wide receivers. I would say Neighbors is the more talented wide receiver, but Neighbors, Wilson, and Olave, they've just been in shitty situations as far as quarterbacks go and offenses go. So I still lean Neighbors, but I think it's like 1A and 1B when we're talking about Rome and Neighbors.
I just want to add real quick also that Neighbors is 20 years old still. He'll be 21 by the season, but age matters. Daniels is 23. Obviously, they're different positions, but you talk about like your peak of, when you become good. Daniels been in college a lot longer than Neighbors has, which, in my eyes, that talks about the untapped potential that Neighbors still has, in the coffin.
All right, let's move over here to our tier 2 rookies, some guys that there might be a little bit more disagreement about than the first few. And we're going to start things off with Xavier Worthy. Everyone's talking about this. At least Yeti and I were together during the draft, and when the Chiefs drafted Xavier Worthy, my first thought is, okay, we traded up in the first round to get a gadget player. Like, if anyone can make a gadget player work, it's Patrick Mahomes. But we're talking about a guy who's 5'11", 165 pounds or whatever, and I just don't see that being a great option when you had other receivers still on the board that I would have preferred to have. But everybody seems to now have total faith that Xavier Worthy is going to be this amazing wide receiver for the Chiefs and this great fantasy asset as well. So let's talk a bit about Xavier Worthy. What do we think his production is going to be? And then on top of that, there's some breaking news that just came out today before we started recording that Rashee Rice, we all know about his issues with the law, running from cops after he was racing down the street like an idiot. And now apparently he is being accused of assaulting a photographer at some nightclub in Dallas. And this is brand new news, so I don't know if it's real. I don't know if it's not. But at this point, there's no reason to think that it might not be real. So does this updated news and does his issues with the car crash elevate Xavier Worthy in your mind? And we'll go to you first, Yeti.
So last week we talked about Xavier Worthy, and I was highly off the Xavier Worthy train, and that's due to Kansas City having too many weapons in my mind. They still have Kelsey, they had Hollywood Brown, or they have Hollywood Brown now, and they had Rashee Rice still, last week. I think with the news that came out with Rashee Rice, he kind of doubled down on being an idiot. And unfortunately, I don't see how he plays this season, if we're being honest. I wouldn't be surprised if Rashee Rice is put on the non-exempt list by Roger Goodell, because clearly Kansas City is not going to do anything about it until they figure out, the legal situations. But Roger Goodell can come in and he can say, hey, I'm going to take care of this. Rashee is going to be off the roster temporarily. If that's the case, Xavier Worthy is going to be thrown into, I would say, the Rashee Rice role. And when I say that, Rashee Rice was used primarily on slants and outs last season. Get him the ball in space. He's going to be the yak guy, right? That's what Rashee Rice was last year. And I could see the Chiefs, Andy Reid and Mahomes, I could see them trying to draw up more of those plays for Xavier Worthy going into the season.
Yeah, I honestly really like that take, Yeti. I think for me, one thing, if I've ever learned anything, I've been playing Dynasty fantasy football now for about 10 years. If I've learned anything, it is that talent will always outshine situation. So when I think about these prospects, like similar to what I was saying about neighbors, like I do believe the most talented players will always find a way to get on the field. And when CeeDee Lamb came out of college, a lot of people are talking about Amari Cooper, receiver one, Michael Gallup, who's on the come up, wide receiver two. Dak was not this elite thrower of the ball. They still had Zeke, and everyone was like, fade CD, get Judy, who's on this Broncos offense, who's great. And if you like the prospect, obviously we all know what happened, but I think for me, it's, whether or not you think Xavier Worthy can be a Tyreek Hill level. It has nothing to do with Rashee Rice in my eyes, because Hollywood Brown is gone after this year. So after this year, he's gone. Enter Rashee Rice. Kelsey, who knows? He got a 2-year contract. Who knows if he's playing more than 1 year? It's clear that they do really like Worthy. They obviously traded up for him, so it wasn't like he just kind of fell into their lap. They did make a move in order to get him. I think he's the clear wide receiver 4 in this class. I do think he is a good tier below the other guys, but obviously the ceiling with him is something. Anything close to Tyreek Hill is obviously worth it, and then would obviously be worth a much higher pick at that point. So I'm all for taking him, unless you're really anti-Worthy. He didn't have like a really bad injury history or anything like that, and he did have good production at Texas. So I'm all for this pick.
One of the things people have been talking shit on about Worthy is his drop percentage, which I think the year before this year was up over 10%, which is not a good sign. But he was playing with a broken hand for half the year, which might impact your ability to catch the ball. Everyone's saying that because it's the Chiefs, and we know their history with drops recently. But, we'll see. I am putting my fandom hat back on. I am keeping my hopes alive that Xavier Worthy is Tyreek Hill incarnate.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, also like speed kills. Like there's not many guys. There are no other guys that have ever played in the NFL that have ever ran a 4.21 before. So
Yep.
there's definitely a lot of potential there. So
And after the draft, the Chiefs general manager Brett Veach, he went on to say it's a speed game, and the more speed you have on the field, the harder it is for defenses to take away different elements of the game. So it's obviously the Chiefs know what the hell they're doing. They have Andy Reid, the best offensive mastermind in the game. Yeah, the Chiefs are all in on fucking speed, man, and I hate it. But
this is music to my ears. But Yeti, we can give you some music to your ears. Let's talk about your guy, Brock Bowers. This is obviously far and away the tight end one in this class as far as everybody's concerned, a first-round draft pick. What do you guys think the productivity is? I know, Yeti, you talked about this a little bit on the last episode or maybe 2 episodes ago, that you were a little bit skeptical as a Raiders fan of them drafting Brock Bowers. But then after thinking about it, well, this is a team that's going to run 2 tight end sets. Brock Bowers is going to be on the field. He can block. He can catch. So he's going to be involved. Do we think that his fantasy upside is worthy of where he's going in dynasty drafts in that first-round spot?
I want to hear MK's thoughts on this, because last week I gave my opinion on Bowers. So MK, what do you think about Brock Bowers' fantasy value right now?
If there's any player in this draft that I like a lot more than anybody else out there, it's Brock Bowers. Everyone was talking about how great of a prospect he was, and for some reason, people wanted him to go to the Jets really badly, which in my eyes, like, why would you want to go to a team that plays on a stadium where players get hurt every year, and that has Aaron Rodgers, who has maybe 2 years left, max 2, minimum 1, I guess, where he might get hurt. And then you also talk about being the third option for a long time, with Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson already being focal points there. He goes to Las Vegas, who now obviously he takes on right away. He's not going to be the top option, but I love the fact that they brought in Gardner Minshew. And I think that's a little bit of an underrated point, because while O'Connell could win the starting job, if Minshew does win the starting job, he was able to produce Colts wide receivers last year. We talked about Josh Downs, a couple weeks ago. He's a guy that, had a really good rookie season. Michael Pittman obviously had a great season. You're talking about the development of Bowers for 1 year. I think Minshew can take him over the top and really make him into that second option behind Devontae Adams come the second half of the season. But then you think about the longevity, because for tight ends for the most part, outside of Sam Laporta and Kyle Pitts when he was a rookie, it usually takes tight ends a couple years or at least longer than other positions to really get settled in. I look at 2 years from now when Brock Bowers is 24 years old. What is this offense going to look like? Some people might see that as a concern, but what I see is Jacoby Myers is not going to be there. Michael Mayer probably not going to be there. And if he is, he's going to be below Bowers on the depth chart. Devontae's probably gone. So you're talking about Bowers right now being the future number one option as soon as possible next year, honestly, to be honest. Like if they have a really bad season, Devontae might request a trade. So I love this situation. I think he could get fed. I think you just have to be wary of, just taking the tight end in the one tight end leagues that don't have a tight end premium or any type of bonus for them. It is a little risky, but I do love taking him. I would love taking him, if you're in a 1 QB league, I do like taking him, around Xavier Worthy, I think is where he should really be going in this draft.
And something I just want to add, even if Aiden O'Connell does win the job, Hunter Renfro, he's no longer with the Raiders either. So that opens up some target share for Brock Bowers to immediately come in, who I think we talk about him as a tight end, but he's not just a tight end. He can play in the slot. I talked about it last week. Over 50% of his snaps last year for Georgia were actually in the slot. He was in the slot and he was in line, split 50-50 basically. So he's not just isolated to, a one tight end set. I think the Raiders are going to run a lot of 2 tight end sets with him out there in a slot position. And I think as of right now, I would say he's a second option on that offense behind Devontae Adams, which whether the guy is Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew, I think it's going to lead to success for Bowers.
All right. So Bowers stock shooting way up. I like it. Let's talk about Brian Thomas Jr. going over to the Jags. Trevor Lawrence is kind of in a shit or get off the pot kind of situation. Everyone expected him to be awesome. He's had some struggles. He's had some injuries. This team is underproduced, but Trevor Lawrence has talent. There's no doubt about it. And this is a team now without Calvin Ridley. Brian Thomas Jr., is this guy, I've seen the gambit on this where some people say, he is what it is, and some people are real high on Brian Thomas Jr. So I'll start with you, Yeti. What do you think about this pick? Are you trading up to get Brian Thomas Jr.? Are you excited about him?
So in our league of record, Brian Thomas Jr. went about the 109 pick, so towards the end of the first round, which I think is a perfect situation for Brian Thomas Jr. That's where I would lean to get him. I'm not willing to trade up to get him though, like at the 105 or obviously early first round. I'm not even considering Brian Thomas Jr., but like mid to late. Yeah, okay. I'm okay with getting Brian Thomas Jr. if he falls to me. I'm not going to make a move to go get him. I think the landing spot is perfect for Brian Thomas Jr. because if you look at this Jacksonville wide receiver room, they just added Gabe Davis and they lost Calvin Ridley in the offseason, right? Brian Thomas Jr., he's going to be with the Jaguars for 5 years, and I think he complements what Trevor Lawrence does best, and that is throw the ball deep. We saw, I like to compare Brian Thomas Jr. to kind of a T. Higgins light almost. And we saw what T. Higgins and Trevor Lawrence could do in college together, right, at Clemson. And I'm not saying that's how it's going to be in the pros. I know it's going to take time to develop, but over a 5-year contract, I think Brian Thomas Jr. could end up being a T. Higgins light for Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, I agree with most of the stuff that Yeti said. To be honest, I was really high on him a few weeks ago. I watched his tape. He is obviously ran a 4.33. He's a freak athletically. And I think when you're talking about some of the players that have come into the league like that, obviously DK Metcalf being a prime example, he was able to work it out. The question for Thomas is whether or not he can develop that route tree over the middle of the field that isn't just, some type of post or go route or something like that, or, a screen pass where he can take it after the catch. But his athletic ability to, once you get the ball in his hands, it's lights out. And he has good hands too. So I think at the least, he will be a great deep ball threat for Trevor Lawrence, who obviously, I wasn't on the pod last year, but I wrote in some of my articles how much I love Lawrence. And I think that he will have a bounce back. And I think with him, it's just, is he going to be able to develop a good relationship with T-Law? And if they can come to a good chemistry, this could be huge for T-Law for, the future of him, because he finally has his young wide receiver one that, I mean, you look at the receivers that he's played with in his past. You have Calvin Ridley coming off a suspension, Christian Kirk out of Arizona. He hasn't really ever played with a great weapon, so I am excited to see, T-Law hopefully take a step up in his game this year.
Okay, I'm glad you brought up Trevor Lawrence because I think his fantasy value right now at quarterback 13, according to Keep Trade Cut, is way too low, in my opinion. I think he should be solidified as a top 8 quarterback option. Like, if you can get him for like a first pick next year, or first round pick next year, and a lower tier running back or like aging running back, I would do that in a heartbeat. Honestly, like Trevor Lawrence had one bad year last year. We have to consider he had a shoulder injury, he had a knee injury, but I think his projection is straight up right now with Brian Thomas Jr. coming to that offense, as well as Gabe Davis. I think those two weapons are going to complement what Trevor Lawrence can do best, and he's just way too cheap at this point.
Completely agree.
You're talking about stacking with a cheap quarterback and an up-and-coming rookie wide receiver. I like it. Let's talk about the guy with one of the best names in this draft. I don't think people focus enough on his name, but Ladd McConkey, which is just amazing. Like, that's just a great name. So good sign there. But he obviously got drafted to the Chargers. He's going to be in this very interesting Jim Harbaugh offense. We don't really know what to expect. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what is this going to be? A pass-heavy offense? Are they going to neglect the pass? Is Harbaugh going to adapt to his roster? Is he going to stick with his old ways? I don't know what to think. Where do you guys value Ladd McConkey? I'll start with you, KN.
I love Ladd McConkey. I mean, obviously the thing is, now that there's been Cooper Kupp, everyone sees like the white slot receiver is, oh my God, white slot receiver from Georgia going to play with Justin Herbert. We got to get him. But he's a very crisp route runner, and he does genuinely, like coaches have talked about on the news, like how good of, how hard his work ethic is and how good of a guy he is genuinely. So in terms of like how he's going to make an impact in Harbaugh's locker room, I really like that. And I think that people are talking about, the Chargers might be like Michigan, especially with the draft pick of Joe Alt kind of proving that they're going to go towards, a heavy running game. You act like Herbert's still not going to be throwing the ball at least 30 times a game, or at least 25. So if it's anything less than that, that would be crazy. But McConkey has the potential, obviously, to step into that wide receiver one role. But I do think that people should be conscious that Josh Palmer had a solid season last year when healthy. Quentin Johnston, who had a horrible rookie year, but, what stuff happens. Like we've seen players have really bad, rookie years and then come back their next year. And then they just picked up DJ Chark. So it'll be interesting to see, based on when your draft is, how McConkey moves within this depth chart. And, is he going to start out the season as the wide receiver 3 or 4, or is he going to slot in right away as like that wide receiver 2, kind of like with what we saw with Puka Nacua getting those snaps week 1 with the Rams?
MK, I'm kind of disappointed you didn't describe Ladd as a gritty gym rat guy that can he has so much potential, and he just is so great off the field, and comp him to like Wes Welker or Julian Edelman. Like, come on, MK, what are we doing?
What are we doing here?
Yeah. I know there's a lot of questions about Jim Harbaugh's offense, rightfully so. But it's not like the Chargers are going to throw the ball only like 100 times a year. I think that's getting like, I don't know what people are thinking. I know Harbaugh's going to run the ball a shit ton, right? And it's not going to be the Chargers of old where Herbert's throwing the ball 600 times a season, but he's still going to be throwing the ball, and he's got to get the ball to somebody. That might not be Ladd right away because, as MK alluded to, I think Josh Palmer is a good wide receiver. They have that connection established already. But Ladd is going to be the guy that's going to get you yardage over the middle, and he's probably in line to see at least 100 targets this year. I think that's his floor, is 100 targets. When we're talking about Keenan Allen and Mike Williams being gone, that opens up over 175 targets right there. So Ladd slots right in. He's going to be a friendly weapon for Herbert. So I love him. I'll happily take him at the end of the second or start of the second where he went in our league of record.
So let me ask you, Yeti, looking at this wide receiver room in LA, are you who's the number one wide receiver and then number two and number three? Like who are the top three and what order are they in? Do you predict this season? Cards on the table. Make the prediction.
So you ask me right now, I think Josh Palmer is a 1, Ladd is a 2, 3. God, this is gross to say, but Quentin Johnson probably.
You agree with that, KN?
I like that take. I think Ladd could be wide receiver 1 because the potential is higher, but I like Palmer having a good season. I think he's very underrated. And with him, it's probably just, whether or not he's going to stay healthy.
All right. Let's move on to Jonathan Brooks, RB1 in Carolina. He's 20 years old. He's got third down potential. It's Carolina, though. Are we excited about this situation? Where do you value Jonathan Brooks, KN?
I love Jonathan Brooks. I have been so hyped up about this pick since he was drafted. I'm not in love with the situation, but if you talk about the available situations there were going into the draft, I don't think Carolina's bad. They are a team that, is going to be willing to spend money. They have a young quarterback. I like that. You mentioned it, 20 years old, very, very important for running back longevity is that, Brooks isn't coming into college with any mileage. You talk about the other running backs, in this class, Blake Corum is coming in, playing 5 years in Michigan, getting a full workload. So you talk about, the difference there. I watched Brooks a lot last year. He was terrific for Texas. Good pass catcher, broke a lot of tackles. Obviously, he tore that ACL, and I think that was like the biggest knock on him going into the draft, or else he would have been really the clear running back 1 going into the draft. But you have to look at the draft capital here. They traded up to get him, round 2, pick 46. He's the clear RB1. I think if you need a running back, I think after Xavier Worthy, I would be fine taking Brooks as high as that. Before Ladd, I could see you taking him before Brian Thomas. I think it could be a little bit of a stretch and it could be risky, but you have to look at the dynasty running back market these days. And I was looking at it the other day, and you're talking about, Bijan and Gibbs and Hall, and then, Taylor, McCaffrey, Etienne, and, Saquon's up there too. But then when you're looking at these options around there, you're talking about guys like Kyron Williams, who just had Blake Corum added, and then Devon Achane, who had trouble staying on the field, and, Rashad White, who added Bucky Irving. So when I'm thinking about a guy that could get into that elite tier, if all works out with Brooks, he will be one of the more valuable dynasty running back assets that there are currently a very rare amount of.
I'm so torn on Jonathan Brooks because he did look great for the 10 games he was healthy at Texas. And it's important to note that was his first year starting with Texas. So we don't know what he looks like over a full, season stretch, right? And he's coming off the ACL injury. That's a huge concern for me. The situation is kind of like I would have much preferred him to go to obviously to like the Chargers or the Cowboys. Like if he landed to one of those situations, I would be like, Jonathan Brooks, he should be like your 106, 105. If you need a running back, yeah, go get him there. But the situation is not great. And when we're talking about Jonathan Brooks, I would be okay with waiting a little bit later for a guy like Trey Benson, who I think he's going to be in a much better offense going forward. And he might not be the starter right away, but he's at least lined up a lot better than I think Jonathan Brooks is.
I don't mind that take. I think Benson is a good pick, but I think you just got to look at the difference in the draft capital there and, where Benson was drafted compared to where Brooks was drafted. And, I love Benson, and obviously I'm sure we'll talk about him very soon. But, I do like the Panthers brought in 2 very expensive guards to, help protect Bryce Young. And I think they drafted a lineman as well in like a day 2 pick. So I think if they're willing to draft him that high, and you look at the other running backs on this roster and what Chuba Hubbard was able to accomplish last year towards the end of the season with that Panthers team, that was the clear worst team in the league. I like the amount of touches that Brooks could get in this offense in the future. They have a solid defense, so I like them. They're not going to be getting blown out in games. I think there's a lot of potential here. Is he going to be great year 1? Probably not, because it's going to be a really run by committee system. But there is a possibility that by week 14 we see him take over the backfield completely.
All right.
Yep.
I put Yeti in the crosshairs last time. I'm going to put you in the crosshairs. Cards on the table. Who has the better rookie season? Who are we just Trey Benson or Jonathan Brooks?
I'm going to go with Jonathan Brooks. And the one thing I will say is we will know more throughout the summer about his injury, and is he gonna be ready for training camp? If he's ready in July, give me Brooks all day. I still think Benson will sit behind Connor, but obviously with Connor and his age, you could see a good potential situation where he goes down, and then Benson has 2 or 3 great weeks, and then they just say, fuck it, let's ride with Benson for the rest.
You agree with that, Yeti?
I tend to lean with Benson, and I say that just because we know that James Conner is not going to play a full season. I'm not saying he's going to get hurt, but if you look at his career history, he's due to miss at least 2 games a season.
You rooting for injuries right now?
I'm not. No. Don't twist up my words. I'm just speaking facts. Look at his career log there. And I think if Trey Benson takes over, like if something were to happen early in the season where Trey Benson is forced to be the running back 1, I don't think he's going to look back from that point going forward, honestly, especially with James Conner being on the last year of his contract. I think they're more willing to be like, all right, let's let the rookie shine a little bit. But counterpoint, I could also see them saying, let's just run James Conner into the fucking ground, right? So flip the coin on that one.
I see both sides. I see how Benson has the potential 100%.
All right, well, let's move on to someone potentially very exciting in Keon Coleman as maybe the wide receiver 1 in Buffalo, paired up with Josh Allen. Yeti, I'm going to toss this one to you first. Keon Coleman, what are your expectations for this guy in his rookie season and beyond?
Well, I'm going to be honest, after Keon Coleman's press conference and all the clips that are coming out, I think he shot up to like wide receiver 3 for me. Just kidding. But if you haven't seen those clips yet on Twitter of him talking to the media about his golf game or his coat, like shopping, please go check those out because they are fucking gold. But getting back to Keon Coleman's fantasy value, Keon Coleman is an interesting guy because before the draft, I was studying him quite a bit. And Matt Harmon from Reception Perception. If you haven't heard of him, I highly recommend checking him out. He logs every wide receiver, compares how they do versus like man coverage, zone coverage, press coverage. Keon Coleman was one of the worst against all kinds of coverages. Like he did not have much success in college. So I was kind of like, out on Keon Coleman, like when we're talking about those numbers in college, because if he can't do it in college, like how does that translate to the NFL, right? But I think the landing spot is extremely attractive now. And it kind of makes me go like, okay, Keon Coleman, he's worth a early to mid second round pick. If he falls below that, I think you're getting extreme value. And I say that because of how many vacated wide receiver targets we're talking about on a Josh Allen-led offense. There's over 280 targets available with Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis being gone. And I know they signed Curtis Samuel. But Keon Coleman was handpicked by Josh Allen. And I think the connection between Keon Coleman and Josh Allen going down deep just sounds juicy for fantasy value.
I like the analysis you put together. For me, it's very simple. Keon Coleman he's going to be a roller coaster. He is the biggest boomer bust prospect we have in this class. I scouted Coleman, did not like what I saw on tape. His production was very mediocre at best. His combine was where he really started to shoot down the rankings. But obviously we saw him go 33rd overall to the Bills. Like I've said, many times so far, draft capital does matter a lot where a team drafts him. That was the Bills' first round pick, basically. They traded out. I do really like the fact that Allen handpicked him compared to what else is on the board. It means that he liked him more than Ladd McConkey and more than, Adonai Mitchell and Jalen Polk, guys that went around him. I think he's worth, in that range of, if you prefer him just because he's with the Bills and he's 20 years old, take him over Ladd, take him over, some of these other guys that are going in that range. But you are really risking it with him because there is a lot of bust potential with him. And I think more than any prospect that you're taking around this range.
High risk, high reward situation. You got to imagine at least just the dichotomy between Stephon Diggs' attitude and what we've seen so far from Keon Coleman. It's going to be it's going to be very similar to when the Raiders fired their head coach and the entire team felt like they were on vacation for the season. It's going to be like that in Buffalo, where you got rid of the crybaby, you got someone who's just excited to be there, and it's not like Stephon Diggs was doing that much anyway, so it seems like maybe a good move for them, but we'll have to wait and see. This is the last one in our mid-tier discussion, and this is a good one. We're going to talk about Penix and we're going to talk about Nix. These guys are very interesting. Obviously, Penix, I don't know if anyone knows what to expect anymore. We don't know what's going on. If you guys have thoughts on that, I'd love to hear it. And then Bo Nix. I personally, as a division rival of this team, think Bo Nix is going to be garbage. I think maybe Yeti could agree with me there. I know Alan last week had some choice words for Bo Nix, or Bo Nix fans, I guess, or Broncos fans saying, what the hell are they should have just kept Russell Wilson because now they took on all of this additional money and they picked a guy in an offense. Who knows what's going to happen? He's not going to produce. So what do you guys think about these two guys? I'll start with you, Yeti. What do you think about Penix? What do you think about Nix? Are these guys worthy of a second-round draft pick?
Oh, man. Penix landing spot hurts me for a variety of reasons. A, I wish he would have gone to the Raiders. And B, I think he is the best passing quarterback in this draft. I hate that he went to the Falcons because we know he's going to sit behind Kirk at least for one season, potentially 2 seasons. And it's going to be the, Jordan Love situation, or I'm not comparing him to Mahomes, but Mahomes sat for a couple years as well. And we're going to see that with Michael Penix. I do think there is a world in which he could see the field as early as, 2025. So next season, the following season, which is great news for, Penix owners. And I think he is set up. He'll have Kyle Pitts, he'll have Drake London, and a lot of weapons on that offense, right? But it's hard to pick him like in the early second round. And I know in our league of record, he went towards the end of the second round, but I've seen his ADP start climbing up a little bit just because people are skeptical of Kirk Cousins' health. Real quick, I'll add a little nugget about Bo Nix. I think Bo Nix is going to do better than a lot of people think. And I say that because of who he is playing for, Sean Payton. Sean Payton, I'm not going to compare Bo Nix to Drew Brees, but Sean Payton is going to draw up a lot of screenplays, a lot of quick hitters for Bo Nix. And the biggest negative or biggest downside of scouting Bo Nix is he played in a gimmick offense. He had a lot of slant routes. He had a lot of bubble routes, a lot of screens. Well, that's exactly what Sean Payton does. So Bo Nix's game doesn't really need to change at all. It fits exactly what Sean Payton's going to do. And I'm not saying, he's going to be a great quarterback, but I think he's going to surprise a lot of people with his performance this year.
Yeah, I like what you were saying, Yeti. I think for me, what comes down for Penix is how many bench spots do you have in your Dynasty league? If you are a league where you're like, fuck it, and my main league is kind of like one of these two, where we're going to have a fuck ton of roster spots and there's not going to be a waiver wire. And, you're going to be able to draft your late round prospects and be able to keep them for probably a year or two. If you're in that type of league, I think Penix is I would, be willing to take him in that tier of those guys that we just discussed because his potential, like you just said, I don't think he's the best passer in the draft, but some people do. So I think for that, that sake, his potential in the future is obviously great with the young weapons he has around him. I think the earliest we can see him is this year. I think if Kirk Cousins goes down, that's where, Penix comes in and he plays well. This is where he just starts his career, and Kirk, unfortunately, has to ride the bench while making also $40 million a year. Bo Nix is really interesting. I actually do like him. I'm personally probably not going to draft him in many high-stake dynasty leagues because I'm personally not willing to take the risk on him in that offense. But he is going to probably start right away or start by, mid-season. I like that they drafted Troy Franklin, his guy in the 4th round. Besides that, they traded Jerry Jeudy. They still have Courtland Sutton, but I'm not really liking the team that Denver has. So I think if Nix plays this year, he could have a decent real life season, but I can't see him being very relevant for fantasy unless he somehow just ends up going off and like is way better than people think. So I would keep Knicks towards that back half of the second round, kind of in that lower tier of, around where these next guys that we're going to talk about go. But, if you need a QB, I'm all for taking Knicks because he will start and he is in a Sean Payton offense. And he was drafted 12th overall. So I've mentioned a few times, draft capital does matter.
All right. So, gentlemen, I have a request for you. We've already hit an hour of our time, and I don't want to keep these brainiacs waiting all night long for us to finish this thing up. So both of you, if you don't mind, while I talk about this next guy and introduce him, if you would go highlight one person from this next list that you want to talk about for sure, both of you, so we have 2 additional after this first one, and then we'll move on to our sleepers, and we'll get the hell out of here. Does that sound good?
Sounds good,
great.
Chief.
All right.
Producer Scotty.
Producer Scotty, producing. All right, so the next guy we're going to talk about in our third tier here is a guy that's been getting a lot of hype, Ricky Pearsall, obviously going to San Francisco. This is an offense with, as of right now, kind of a lot of mouths to feed, but there's some speculation that is going to be changing here in the near future. So, Yeti, I'll start with you. Ricky Pearsall, is this a guy that you're targeting? Do you have high hopes for his production this year and going forward?
So this season is very, very cloudy for Ricky Pearsall. As of right now, Debo and Brandon Ayuk are not being traded as of right now. I'm not saying that can't change before August, but right now things aren't looking great for Pearsall, and I'm not like super high on him at his current ADP. I'm not saying he's a bad wide receiver. It's just I think the longer this draws out, the more we're going to see Brandon Ayuk probably stay and Debo get traded because Debo's older. And I think Brandon Ayuk is obviously a much better wide receiver than Pearsall. They kind of do the same things, in my opinion. They have the same kind of route tree. So I tend to lean in the camp of being out on Pearsall just because of competition.
I'm going to have to disagree with you here, Yeti. I love Ricky Pearsall. This is a guy that I think could really zoom up draft boards. I am obviously upset that Ayuk or Debo was not traded. But again, you got to look at the draft capital. He was taken 31st overall. That's how they decided to use their first round pick. Xavier Legette was available. Keon Coleman was available. Ladd McConkey was available. Adonai Mitchell was available. And they decided to take Ricky Pearsall. So I think analysts like us have to take into consideration where, NFL GMs and organizations have these players ranked. I don't know if you guys saw that one-handed catch he made, but that kind of put me onto him a little bit where I was like, oh my God, like he really kind of scared me in that
so
way. So
here's the thing I want to say about that and interject is that is the only highlight I ever see from him. Has he done anything else? Is there anything he's ever accomplished on the field besides that?
He has. And I think the issue is he is a little bit older and, he played at Florida, had some solid production, nothing crazy. The athleticism scores are off the charts for him, very athletic guy. I do like the offense he's going into. You talk about Kittle, you talk about Christian McCaffrey and the wide receivers I just mentioned. None of them are relatively that young other than Ayuk. And Ayuk, like we talked about, could be on his way out. So Pearsall, he's not going to be great for this year unless we see an injury to one of those players. However, if you're talking about long-term assets for a team that's rebuilding, I think he could have more long-term potential than some of these guys going in this range. So I love Pearsall. He's a first-round receiver. I think people need to value that a little bit more. We've seen players slide in previous years that, weren't liked. Brandon Ayuk, for example, slid in a lot of drafts when he was drafted by the 49ers. I think you just got to realize that the 49ers are taking this guy first round. There is a reason for, in the Kyle Shanahan offense, why they really like his play style.
So MK, God, what am I doing? A little teaser for tomorrow. We have a graphic coming out that's going to be start one, bench one, and cut one.
Give it to me.
We have 3 options for you. We have Keon Coleman, Ladd McConkey, and Ricky Pearsall. What are you doing?
At this point, Ladd is the obvious start, I think, in my opinion. I'm still probably going to take Coleman over Pearsall as of right now. I think if we see a little bit more throughout the offseason, any type of hype around him that he's doing really good in training camp, or the rookie camp that's going on right now, or any more talks that Debo or Ayuk could be traded this summer, or, maybe during the season or something like that, I think Pearsall could be in contention with Coleman here, but I don't know if you can pick him unless you're really in a deep rebuild, but I do agree it is a little risky because I don't think he's that great of a prospect, either. I really just like the landing spot here, and I like the fact that, Shanahan picked him.
You agree with all that, Yeti?
Yep, I'm in the same boat. Yep.
All right, I have a favor for you guys. I need you to talk shit on this next guy because I really wanted the Chiefs to draft him instead of Xavier Worthy. This is the guy I was hoping for. This is the guy who I think would fit really well in the offense. But I was probably wrong because the Chiefs disagreed with me and they know more ball than I do. So let's talk about Adonai Mitchell. Is he better in real life? Is he better in fantasy? Is he good at all? Is he just guaranteed a bust because he's not playing on my team?
Yeah. So this is the guy that I wanted to bring up. I loved Adonai Mitchell pre-draft. I was very high on him. I thought that he could go in the first round. We're talking about in the 20s, obviously. He dropped very far, very concerning for me. I think for me, the Colts GM kind of came out and said that all the personality issues and, whatever was going on with his health, where if he doesn't take his meds or whatever, then he is not a good teammate or doesn't have the work ethic. I think all of that is coachable. When you're talking about pure talent, I talked about it last time I was on the podcast, but I do think his closest comparison is T. Higgins. My issue with the pick here for a fantasy perspective is looking at where Mitchell stacks up in this Colts offense. The focal point of this team for the next 2 years is going to be Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor manning this backfield and, running a lot of play actions, RPOs, ground and pound. That's how the Eagles, were good. And with Steichen, that's also, how the Colts are going to be able to have that change of pace. Michael Pittman just got signed to an extension. He is the wide receiver one there. I still think he will be the wide receiver one there. Josh Downs, the slot receiver in this offense, rookie last year, had a good year. I think Mitchell could be a great real life receiver. I think he can make some big plays for them. I think he could have some big games here and there. But can I ever see this guy being a top even 15 fantasy receiver? I don't know if I could see that unless it happens 3 or 4 years from now or significant injuries, especially with, I can't say that Anthony Richardson, with all the good things that we've seen, that he's going to be a consistent 300-yard passer or anything close to that.
Yeah, I think for real life, he's going to be great for the Colts because he does give them that vertical threat that Alec Pierce hasn't. He's kind of given them over the past couple of years, but let's be real, Adonai Mitchell's a much better prospect than Alec Pierce was coming out of college. And Adonai Mitchell is going to beat you over the top, and he can catch the ball. He can hold on to the ball, which is great news, especially if you're a Chiefs fan, right, Scotty? But I think
get him there.
Yeah, sorry, Scotty. Just had to dig when I
It's
can.
fine.
I can't do it often, so I got to get him in when I can. But real life, great for Adonai Mitchell. Fantasy, I'm out.
All right, well, let's move on to our last guy in the third tier here, and that is Blake Corum. And this is an interesting one to discuss. I'm glad, Yeti, you chose this guy because going into last season, when Kyren Williams first started taking off, I had concerns, given his size and his workload, about his longevity. And I thought, I don't know if I want to own it. Obviously, toward the end of the season, everyone wanted to own him. But at the time, at the beginning of the season, it's like, I don't know if I want to take a risk on a guy who's getting this amount of workload and he's this size and taking this number of hits. I just don't know how long he's going to last. Now they brought in Blake Corum. This is another guy who's got, as MK said, a lot of miles on him, but he's kind of that bruiser who can take those hits and absorb that. What do we think this situation is going to be like? Does this significantly devalue Kyren? And do we think that Corum is going to see a lot of playing time and is a worthy fantasy asset himself? And Yeti, I'll start with you.
So I just want to preface by saying I am a Kyren Williams owner, and there is zero bias in this take that you are about to hear. So just remember that as I go on here. But I think it's important to note that the Rams were going into the 2024 season with Kyren Williams, Ronnie Rivers, and Zach Evans. You hear Kyron Williams, cool. Who are the other two guys I just brought up, right? They were going to draft a running back regardless of Kyron Williams. They needed to draft a running back. To answer your question about if Blake Corum is going to hurt Kyron Williams or not, I lean towards a camp of no, because every year we overreact to running backs landing situations. We freaked out when Zamir White went to the Raiders. Josh Jacobs, the owners, were like, "What the hell? What's going on? Do I have to be scared?" Same thing for Travis Etienne last year with Tank Bigsby. Same thing with Kenneth Walker last year with Zach Charbonnet. And I think we're doing the same thing again with Blake Corum. I tend to think that great running backs just don't get replaced by rookie running backs right away. And you need to trust the talent. And I think Kyron Williams has proven that he is a very talented running back in the NFL. Now, what I see their roles being in this offense, Kyron Williams is going to be the lead dog. And if you look at Sean McVay's running backs workload percentages over the past 3 years, all three of his starting running backs have averaged 55% of the snaps, just 55% of the snaps. So I think that leaves plenty of room for Blake Corum to get his, but Kyron Williams is still going to be the lead dog. And I think this draft pick of Blake Corum was strictly to keep Kyron Williams healthy, because we do know he has a little bit of injury concern. And his draft capital wasn't great. Kyron Williams' draft capital wasn't great. But I think they realize they need a solid RB2 behind him if he does go down while carrying the main 55% workload.
Yeti, I'm actually in a lot of disagreement here with you, unfortunately.
Oh.
But I like the points that you made. I think that I agree that, with the Tank Bigsby situation, there was a lot of talk about what was going to happen and what wasn't, and shit happened, whatever. But when I look at Blake Corum as a prospect, he was a top running back in college football for multiple years. His biggest issue, which I touched on a little bit earlier, is mileage. Like, coming off an injury, having a lot of touches in college. But as like a back, he's very talented. He knows the game very well. Great guy in the locker room. I think he's going to come in, and I think it's going to be more of a 50-50 split. Not right away. I think Kyron will be a great pick. He's probably going to be going in the late first, second round of redraft leagues. I think taking him there is fine. In Dynasty right now, he's ranked as like, somewhere in between the 8 to 10 range, 8 to 11 range of Dynasty running backs. If I'm an owner of him, I'm trying to get rid of him immediately, because my concern is having a running back valued that high, where if Kyron goes down, I cannot confidently say that he will come back with the same role. Because let's say Kyron goes out for 4 weeks, I think Blake Corum could come in and play incredible. And then they're like, okay, we got to make sure that we get both these guys a great amount of touches. And you talk about using day 2 capital on him. You don't use day 2 capital on a player just to fill a position. So I think Corum is interesting because you're talking about the other guys in this tier, a couple guys we didn't mention with Xavier Legette and, Jalen Polk and Trey Benson, some of these other guys in this tier. I think the thing with, why am I forgetting? I'm completely blanking. I'm Blake Corum is that, he has the guy in front of him, but I think his situation could become the best with a couple small things happening, especially with Kyron only having 1 to 2 years left on that contract.
Any counterpoints, Yeti? You want to keep this argument going?
I mean, the only thing I get it. I get the draft capital, but if we want to play that game, then we look at Tank Bigsby. We look at Zach Charbonnet. We look at Zamir White. These guys didn't break out.
Bigsby was a day 3 guy.
Okay. What about the other 2 guys?
Charbonnet.
Day 2 guys. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Look, I agree. Yeah.
It
doesn't always work out, but I think also Charbonnet didn't work out. He honestly had the potential to do what I just said Corum could do, where, Kenneth Walker did go out for a few games last year, and then Charbonnet just happened to perform poorly. So I think it just depends on, I said earlier, talent will always outshine the situation. So if you believe in Blake Corum as a player, I think you should take him. I wouldn't reach on him. Like, if you're in this range right here and you have other great receivers available, early second round guys, late first round, even if players are falling, I don't think the receiver is the bad pick, but I think Corum is definitely the solidified RB3 in this class.
But KN, you're not panicking on Kyron Williams if you're a Kyron Williams manager.
I'm not panicking on him, but I don't think it's a bad idea to trade him unless you are saying I am the best team in the league right now and there's no reason why I need to make a trade. But if you're sitting in that middle ground right now and you got lucky with Kyron last year and you're one of those meathead owners who, is out there and had the first pick of the waiver wire, so you got Kyron, trade him because he might not be at this value much longer as soon as the season starts. One injury to a running back, we could see him going down the charts quickly.
All right. So you heard two different perspectives, so take them with grains of salt as you deem fit. Let's move on here to the last segment and our sleepers. We're each going to give a sleeper candidate. Yeti, I'm going to start with you. You have one, right? You don't have it on the show notes, but I assume you got one in that beautiful head of yours.
I got one cooking up here.
All right. So we'll start with Yeti, but these are just guys that are a little bit later in drafts, a guy that maybe you want to trade up in the 3rd round or the 4th round to go grab and just take a shot on them because you think they have a path to success. So we'll start with you, Yeti. Go ahead and kick us off.
Yeah, so my sleeper pick is going to be Jalen McMillan, Tampa Bay wide receiver out of Washington. I like Jalen McMillan because of what he could be in the Tampa Bay offense. Jalen McMillan is your prototypical slot receiver in the NFL. And right now he's slotted to be behind he's slotted to be behind Chris Godwin, who is, a true slot wide receiver, but he's on a contract year. I don't know if Chris Godwin's going to stay or not. If he leaves, Jalen McMillan has the opportunity to step into that slot role with Baker Mayfield. And I love that fit for him because I think Jalen McMillan, his season last year was cut short not cut short. It started later because he was dealing with knee injuries, a shoulder injury, but his 2022 season, he was, in my mind, one of the best wide receivers in college. I think he's better than Jalen Polk, actually. And so when we're talking about McMillan, if he's there at the end of the 3rd, early 4th, I'm happy to take a shot on McMillan there.
I like it. Sorry, Kay, do you have any comments?
Too. No, I was just going to say I like the take. I like the upside. And, the only issue there is obviously Godwin being there and Trey Palmer last year. But if McMillan was a very elite receiver, so I could definitely see that happening. My sleeper isn't really much of a sleeper. I just kind of wanted to talk about this guy because I wasn't sure if he was going to get mentioned. But Marshawn Lloyd out of USC getting drafted to the Green Bay Packers. The reason why this situation is so interesting to me was because recently it was brought to my attention that the Josh Jacobs contract there's an out after every year. And I did not realize that when he originally signed. It kind of just passed over with all the other running back signings. But I was high on Josh Jacobs at first because Green Bay is just such an elite situation with an upcoming offense and the LaFleur offense where they're going to run the ball. There is a lot of potential for Marshawn Lloyd to be the lead back in this offense next season or, maybe the season after that. I think he could be a project play similar to what we saw with Zamir White, where Zamir White, obviously sat. And then, now this year it looks like he's going to be entering as the starting running back or at least close to it. So I think with Lloyd, what we could see is if he does have a good rookie year, regardless of how Josh Jacobs is, unless Jacobs has a top 5 season, if Lloyd has a good year, I see no reason why the Packers might not take an out on Jacobs' contract and just run it with Lloyd and, maybe pick someone else up or just keep AJ Dillon. So I think for this year, Lloyd, not a great pick if you're just, looking for a guy to help you out right now. But in the long-term dynasty where you're talking about late 2nd, 3rd round picks, depending on how big your league is, I think, Marshawn Lloyd is a great player to add to your team.
Man, you brought up AJ Dillon and I was like, Who the fuck is that? I kind of forgot about him just because.
Volleyball.
Yeah, he's irrelevant at this point. Like I don't, in my mind, AJ Dillon he has one purpose, and that is to get you like 2 yards or a touchdown.
He's
all
also,
AJ
he's
Dillon
also a very heavy Twitch streamer. So
Oh, good for him. Yeah, I saw.
at
I
least,
see him
yeah,
on
like
Farming
you know what?
Simulator.
Maybe we'll see him on his own podcast someday. That seems what most players.
Yeah,
are doing
I would
these
love
days
to have
anyway.
him on the podcast sometime.
And he's also a big fan.
AJ Dillon,
and-
I love you.
Yeah, he's a big fan and longtime listener of this podcast. So, AJ Dillon, shout out to you for being a brainiac, because we all know that you are and you're dedicated to us. I'll round us out here with my sleeper, which is, again, these sleepers are hit and miss. Don't know how they're going to turn out, but you just like the ambiance. You like the aura of the guy, and you think maybe he's got a chance. And mine is Tyrone Tracy with the New York Giants. I love when I look at this guy objectively, and it's not going to sound objective, but it is objective, I see Isaiah Pacheco. And not necessarily in the way that he plays, but in the situation that he finds himself in. I think he's going to be obviously a later round guy, but he has an opportunity here to really establish himself early in this Giants offense, considering he's competing primarily against Devin Singletary, who obviously had a great season last year, but throughout his career has been a little bit hit and miss, not the most productive guy. So I think he's got an opportunity there. And the bottom line is this guy has pass catching upside. He was used a lot outside. He returned kicks, returned punts. He's athletic. He's got, he's top tier in almost all of the combine metrics. I think he ran like a 4.43 40, something like that. 210 pounds, 5'11", perfect prototypical running back body. And he ranked inside the top 10 in college in yards after contact per attempt. So we know he can run hard. So the combination of his athleticism and the situation, I think, could lend some credibility to the idea that this guy's going to start seeing the field sooner rather than later. And if you're drafting in the mid to late third round or early there, he's someone that I was picking up in all of my dynasty leagues just for the shot in the dark, just to throw the dart at the wall. So any thoughts on that, gentlemen, before we wrap things up here?
Yeah, I think, I like the pick there. I like, the fact that the situation is open. Obviously, Singletary, like you said, had a good year, but, Tracy, who was a former wide receiver, could find his way getting some snaps, on the third down. But the real question for me is, with a lot of these rookie running backs, is the way that you get on the field as a running back is, can you block? And honestly, as a receiver too, it's, can you block? And obviously, if you can block, it means that you'll play 95% of the snaps, obviously for a receiver. And obviously the people that play more snaps will over time accumulate those little extra stats that come with playing, a bigger percentage of the game. So I think for him, it's going to be, can he get on the field with his other aspects outside of, after the catch and what he brings to the table.
And that's one downside with everything I just said, because Devin Singletary, the one thing he can do is block. He has been a reliable blocker his entire career. So we'll have to see how things work out. Yeti, you have anything before we finish up?
I don't think if we look at the Giants depth chart, there's Devin Singletary and then Eric Gray and then Tyrone Tracy, who's slotted as the RB3. I think it's very possible Tyrone Tracy, if he performs well in rookie OTAs and training camp, that he is RB2 and he has the third down work. Because let's be honest, Devin Singletary, he can't be a every down back, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he's built to be an every down back. So they're going to have to spell him. And I think Tyrone Tracy could give them a good counter punch to Devin Singletary, and he could catch passes out of the backfield on third down or, second and long, whatever that looks like. I think he has a role in that offense right away.
My dynasty teams, thank you both for your support. Gentlemen, that is it. That's all the time we have. All you brainiacs out there who tuned in, I cannot thank you enough. Thank you for spending some time with us here. I'm glad you didn't find anything better to do. Of course, please go follow us on all the social medias, Leatherbrains. You can find us on YouTube, on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok, on everything that you can possibly think of, even all the stuff that you've never heard of. We're there. We're all over the place. So go give us a follow, leave some comments, leave some reviews, all that good stuff. And thank you again for your time. I don't know how this outro is going to go. We didn't talk about this before. Yeti, how about you take the out?
All right.
I'll
take the butt.
Thank you again, and we
are
out.
If you enjoyed this episode, Make sure you tune into our new releases every week on your favorite podcast app. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and check out leatherbrains.com for all of your fantasy football needs. And remember, Brainiacs, a championship should be more than a fantasy.